Okay. So, so we've talked about the principles of animation, um, and that's something that, um, like, you're able to name quite a few of them, if not all of them. I think all of them. You probably got really close to all of them. Um, and again, I don't expect you to have like this um, amazing recall of these things right now, right? Especially considering most of them, like they're it's just words right now, right? Like we understand what that guy's talking about. You understood what I was talking about. The hard part about this is learning to implement those, or learning why that was important enough to even have as a principle, right? And so we started in this class for you to learn those 12, because as you go along, um, over the next 3 years, you're going to see opportunities to implement those, right? I mean, you have to realize it took them like 40 years to develop those 12 principles. You shouldn't be able to grasp them in their entirety in one class period, right? Um, so having said all that, we're going to get started on just making some animations, right? But I need you to realize that the reason that we talk about these is learning to control the motion. Okay. Now, um, we've already looked at how to set keyframes. We looked at how to set more keyframes to be in control of it with the arrow, right? And you realize that now that sort of the currency of animation is keyframes, right? We set keyframes in Maya, and that allows us to have sort of creative control as we're making a motion happen, right? Um, from there, we get to more fine control. Like there is more and more detail that needs to be refined, and that's where I showed you a couple of days ago the graph editor, right? How many of you actually have opened up the graph editor and tried some stuff in it? Anybody? A couple people. Cool. Um, what we're going to do, what we're going to do today is start project 2. Okay, so I'm going to open up D2L. We'll read what project 2 is, but a quick summary of project 2. We're going to do a bouncing ball and a jumping bottle. Okay, so the bouncing ball, like that example we just saw there, had like half a dozen of them in it, right? The bouncing ball is really where most animation classes start, right? We didn't start there because I wanted you to feel comfortable in the software before we jump straight into that. And it seems like a bouncing ball should be pretty easy, right? We set a keyframe on the ground, we set a keyframe up in the air. Maya does the rest, right? So we're gonna talk about that. Maya does something, right? It doesn't make the decisions you want it to make, right? Now, I do want you to kind of pay attention and remember this lesson. This is a very like this is one of those lessons that I refer back to a lot. Like 3 years down the road, I'll be like, remember in the bouncing ball how this thing does this. Well, this is also how your hips should move on your character, or this is how you want to get that like sharp stop when a character like makes a gesture, right? Like a lot comes from this, right? The reason everybody starts with the bouncing ball is because it is so easy. It's concepts that are so easily transferable to the way so many different things move, right? Now, I'm guessing half of you have already done this, right, and just created a ball, right? Instead of doing that, though, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a robust ball, and we're also going to talk about rigging. Like, we're not going to do very much rigging, particularly today, but we're going to see why rigging is important. Okay, so if you have done that, like this is also sort of a process I want you to walk through just for good practices reasons. So if you've done this, you want to save it, whatever, go ahead. But what I want everybody to do, file, new scene. Right? So we have a completely new scene. Right? Now go up to ETSU E3, right? DIGM classes, Greg, POA, and then resources. And you'll see right here is this folder called ball rig. Now, I know your instinct is to open that folder and go looking for something that looks like a Maya file to double click on, right? And you're like, that kind of looks like a Maya file. I had a handful of people who have emailed me over the last few weeks being like, that file opens blank, and it's not got anything in it. Because I think some people are probably clicking on that. That's not the Maya file. The Maya file is usually going to be in the scenes folder. You see right there, ballrig.mb. You want to click it, but don't click it. Okay? Don't do it. Don't double click that file. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back a few folders to resources, and you're going to copy this whole folder to your computer. So put it wherever it is you're keeping your stuff. Hopefully that's on a hard drive. How many of you are storing stuff in your My Documents folder? Okay. Please don't only store it in your My Documents folder. Please, periodically copy that onto a hard drive, copy it up to Google Drive. I know people who are not going to graduate midpoint review because they lost everything out of their documents file. They're having to recreate everything they did the first year of class, right? You don't want to be that person. That documents file can get corrupt, or that your profile can get corrupted, and it wipes that documents file. Now your hard drive isn't 100% bulletproof either, right? And I do understand that like I said, you may accidentally leave it plugged into the computer, so you can work temporarily out of that documents file, but back it up on a hard drive. Keep multiple copies of this. This is fresh in my head because I have so many people who are going through midpoint review right now who are having troubles with this. I'm sure you all have questions about midpoint review too. We're going to get to that. We're going to have a day of class probably next after fall break where we talk about midpoint review. So this ball rig folder, right click, copy. I can put mine on my desktop because I'm special. I don't think it'll allow you to store stuff on your desktop. It's actually to protect you, because when you log off, it usually wipes your desktop, and so it's to keep you from accidentally losing a file. So in your documents folder, in your hard drive, wherever's good for you. So now that it's there, again, do not double click on that file, okay? It's just going to mess stuff up. That's how everybody wants to open it. The correct way to open a file in Maya is you open a new scene, right? File, new scene. We already did that. Don't save, right? This is fresh. Maya's open. And Maya's which project are we working on today, right? It could be we're working on the crazy Transformer robot battle scene, or it could be we're working on the dinosaur battle scene, or it could be we're working on the unicorn battle scene, because everything has to fight, apparently, in animation. So whatever it is, I really want to work on the unicorn battle scene right now. Whatever it is, we have to tell Maya which project we're in, right? Literally in a studio, right? I worked at Firaxis. At the same time, we were working on Civ 5 and XCOM. And that was a huge collection of different files that we needed to refer to. And if I had told Maya we're working on the Civ 5 scene, it wouldn't be able to find any of the textures, any of the sounds, any of the models, any of the rigs that I needed for that project, right? So this is telling Maya, this is the project we're working on, right? Not the Maya file, but the project. The way we do that, and I know we've already talked about this, I just feel like this is the thing that really needs to be emphasized. File, set project, and we just point to the folder, okay? So the folder is going to have all of those files inside of it, right? If there's something outside of that folder, you have a sound file, you have a texture file in some other folder, that's not part of your project. If you add that as a texture, Maya's not going to be able to find that later, right? Everything that you're doing needs to be in that folder. So that means later, in this project, we're going to start making some more models. We're going to make them in this folder. You can rename that folder to whatever you want to, as long as when you open up a new version of Maya, you set your project to there. Now, that's a practice you should get into every day here, because whenever you come in and log in, Maya has no idea where your project is. At home, where you're not logging off all the time and you're probably the only user, you may only have to set your project once there and it just stays set for a long time. But it's just a good practice to make sure you know which project you're set in. So we say set, right? And now Maya knows which project we're working on. So it's like, I want to open a file now. Maya goes to that folder to look for whatever file you're looking for, right? Open scene, and it just automatically takes me to that scenes folder. There's my ball rig, right? And I want to say don't save. So you're going to get this error. This is kind of an older file. And at one point, one of the render engines was called Mental Ray. Maya kind of got rid of Mental Ray in favor of Arnold. I'm happy about that. Arnold works way better. But this still has some like legacy nodes left in there that says that Mental Ray still exists. Whenever you get this, just ignore it. It just means the file's a little older. Okay. So here's our ball. Now, why go through all that trouble when you could have just made a sphere, right? Yeah, it's got a texture on it. You could have put your own texture on it, right? This sphere is a little different, okay? First thing I want you to notice is that if you try to click the sphere, you can't. I did that on purpose so you didn't accidentally break this, right? The way we're going to animate this is not by grabbing a piece of mesh and moving it around. We're going to manipulate it with a rig, okay? So when we use the word rig, what we're talking about, like you hear this in other places. Like usually, like probably the most common place is like the big rigs on the interstate pulling a giant tractor trailer or whatever. But you also hear it in like stage productions and stuff, like the lighting rig above it. Rig is like a contraption that's built for manipulation, right? And so when we talk about rigs, what we're saying is this is a way for an animator to interact with your model or with your object, whatever, in order to get an animation out of it, right? If you want to think about a rig, a doll is a model, right? But to turn it into a puppet, you need that little thing you hold above it, right? To move it around. I guess it's more a marionette, right? You need that little like thing above it that causes the arms to raise up and do all this stuff, right? That's the rig. It's the mechanism in which you are able to get a performance or an animation or a deformation out of that object, right? For us, our rig, if you look really closely, you can't see it on the screen, you can probably see it on your screen a little better. Our rig is this little ring around the bottom. It's like a little wavy ring, right? Now when I select that, it looks like I selected the ball. It doesn't. I selected a thing that controls the ball, right? But really the only thing I have selected is that ring, right? The ball is kind of parented underneath it, so it looks like I've selected it. What I'm doing here, though, I'm making changes to that ring, and that ring is going to control the ball. Why go through all that effort, right? Like that's probably the big question. Why can't I just set keyframes on a sphere? So if we look over in our channel box, here's where we're going to find our answer, right? We have our same translates, rotates, scales, visibility, right? But if you go a little further, you're going to see squash and stretch, and you're going to see RX, RY, RZ. Now, if you're not seeing this, there's a chance you have your attribute editor open, and you're not going to find those as easily in there. Like this is what your attribute editor will look like. You need to go up to your channel box, right there. And these are the controls for manipulating a ball, which is different than a sphere, right? Because one of the things you'll notice about a ball is that it comes in contact with the ground at the floor, right? Not at the center of the ball, right? If I created just a sphere here, right? Go ahead and move it up. We get something similar. And I decide to rotate that, it's going to rotate it here, and it looks like it's sliding on the ground. Right? The bottom of it looks like it's sliding around. Well, I may need to be able to rotate this one. You'll see that my pivot point for it is down there, and I can lean it, right? If I wanted my ball to seem like it was leaning from one side to the other instead of rolling, right? I still have the ability to roll the ball. That's what this RX, RY, and RZ is for. Right? So it's probably going to be RZ. If I click this RZ value here, and actually if I click out here on the number and start dragging it, you'll see that I'm able to do that. However, there's another way you can manipulate this value. If you click the name RZ, like how it highlights it in blue there, and then you go out in your viewport and you middle click and drag, you can adjust it that way too. Now, the reason I do that is because that has a little bit more fine control. Like you'll notice that this is going up by a tenth, like it's 16.7. Whereas when I just click out here, when I just click out here and drag, it goes up a whole number at a time, right? Or down a whole number at a time. And so that gives me a little bit more fine control of it to click out here and manipulate it. Right? Now the reason that's important, to have those things separated, is because let's say I wanted to squash and stretch this ball, right? First thing, let's go ahead and get it back to 0 on here so you can see this. If I wanted to squash and stretch this, to get some stretch out of it, I would first have to scale it up. Well, a couple of bad things just happened, right? It went through the floor, and it got fatter, right? Like we talked about preserving volume. When I scale it up here, now it looks like it has more volume, right? So even if I pull it up to like this, I can get that, and then I have to go back here and kind of scale it in this way and this way to kind of make it look like it's stretching, right? Which means I had to manipulate 4 different channels to even get this ball to stretch, right? Versus my ball rig, which has this squash and stretch feature on it here, and that's just a single channel that's going to get all of that out of it, right? Now this is where that middle click is going to come in handy, because if you're just clicking out here on the number and dragging it, it's gonna seem to go like way too big or way too flat. Really, like my only options are this and this, right? And I'm like, I need somewhere in between. That's why I click on the letters and manually drag it. You can get something a little more fine control with that, right? And you can always type numbers in here too if you want to point to, right? Okay. Now let's say we both have like this stretched version of the ball, right? Let's say I needed this ball to roll while it was stretching, right? Like there's instances in which I need the ball to continue to roll forward and like squash and stretch at the same time, right? Well, if I needed this ball to roll and I went and rotated it now, we get this, which is not how the ball would roll. It's how a tic-tac rolls, right? Probably not even how a tic-tac rolls, but with this rig, I can now go adjust this RZ, and I can get a roll with it stretched. Okay? So this is the purpose of this rig, is to give you more control with this ball. Now, again, the reason the rotate is on the floor is because if my ball is stretched, and I'm like, but it's stretched straight up and down, I want it to look like it's traveling forward, I can rotate it and get it stretching at an angle, right? And of course, I always have the translates and all of that. I wouldn't really mess with the scale. In fact, I think the scale is really just going to allow you to make a bigger or a smaller version of the ball. So if you really enjoy this, you're like, I want to do 3 of them. That's cool. All right, go ahead and duplicate this thing. We can make a couple more. We can re-import more files of it. Whatever. We can change the material on it. Okay, so is this making sense? Are you able to get the ball to do all of these things? Okay. If at any point while working on this you're like, that thing isn't working for me, slow me down. I'll answer that question. Don't worry about interrupting me. That's what this is for. Is so we can kind of walk through this. So what I'm going to do kind of quickly is I'm going to animate, or I'm going to create all of the keyframes I need for my ball to bounce. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and delete this imposter ball. There we go. Zero that out. And I'm going to just sort of go off to the side here. With this controller, I'm going to move it over to I'm going to start it up in the air, right? And go ahead and set a keyframe. Okay, so what's the shortcut key again? S. You all have gotten good at that one, right? S. Right. Now I kind of want my ball to be moving forward. So I'm going to go forward a little bit in time. Let's say maybe, I'm just going to try. I'm going to have to change this later. But I'm going to try maybe 8 frames, something like that. And I'm going to move this all the way back down to the ground. Now sometimes it's going to be like, where's the ground? I'm too close, right? If I go over here and just type in 0, it puts me back on the ground. That's a part of rigging. I created this rig so you could zero all of these numbers back out with the exception of scale. And it would put you back at the place where this ball started. Okay? So undo that last thing. So it's all the way on the ground now. Remember that if I moved my timeline now, it's going to snap back. Right? So I want to move this all the way back down to the ground and move it forward a little bit to have it bouncing forward. Right? And then I'm going to go ahead and hit S. Now my personal preference, I like to animate with auto key on. Now auto key is down here in the bottom corner. Follow the mouse down here to the bottom corner. This little circular recycle symbol here that's underneath your play button. And so if we click that, now if I make a change to this, it will set a keyframe on the values I change. So I'm going to go ahead and go out to, let's say, it's 15, 14. I can't see the spacing at this angle, so let's try this. And I'm going to go ahead and set my next bounce, which is up in the air. Right? Now I want you to notice something. We've already talked about this, but my keyframes are only on translate X and Y. And so the only reason I use auto key is so if I forget to hit S, I don't lose what I have already, right? It's already there, right? But it's never it's never the final keyframe, right? That's me posing it. And then after I get it where I want it to be, I know we've already talked about this, I hit S anyway, just to make sure all of those other channels are locked down at that location, okay? So I'm just going to do a couple more of these kind of quickly. I think it's kind of neat. The problem with animating, especially at this stage, is that the first thing you're going to want to do is drag through this and see how your animation's looking. And you're going to be like, wait, that doesn't look right. I may need to put more keyframes in here. You do, but just not yet. So don't worry about that yet. What I would do is I'm just worrying about the main keyframe. So I use the shortcut keys of greater than, less than. So try that there. If you just do the greater than, or the less than key, moves us forward. All right. So we can step forward and back. And that just shows us our keyframes, just the ones we hit S on, right? And so I can kind of do that and get kind of like that flip book effect to see what my motion looks like. And I can imagine the parts in between. And again, I know you're probably like, why imagine them? Maya's already getting them there. Maya's going to get it wrong. You need to be keeping it in your head what you want this animation to look like, right? And we want this to kind of have an arc to that bounce, right? So I'm just going to kind of do that over and over again. I want to show you a couple of other little tricks. For my other keyframe here, right? This next keyframe on frame 20-ish, right? I want that to be on the ground up here, right? So I'm going to extend my keyframe or my timeline out a little bit just to get some more time in here. Go ahead and set this out to, let's try 100. Okay, so I got one bounce there. For this next keyframe, I want it to be on the ground, right? Well, I already have one keyframe on the ground here, right? So a couple of ways I could do, and I know it's not in the right like side-to-side location, but a couple of ways I could duplicate that. I could right-click on my timeline and say copy, and then go out here to like frame 22 and say paste, and it pastes that whole keyframe, and then I can just move it forward, right? So that's another way I can do that. I'm going to delete that and show you another way to do that. Is if I delete that keyframe, I can go here to this frame number 8, and I can middle click on my timeline and drag. And you notice that when I'm middle click dragging, it's not updating. Like the screen stays the same, right? So basically, that's a way for me to get, if I regular click, the animation updates. So that's a way for me to say, well, this is where the ball is on 8. I want my time slider to be over here on frame 23. The ball is still in the same place it was on 8. So if I hit S now, it's like it steals that keyframe and puts it there. Okay? And then I can just alter that. So it's whichever of those work best for you. Be careful. Some people will try to copy that keyframe by doing Control C. That doesn't work. Like that's going to copy the object, and then when you go out here later and try to paste it, it's just going to paste a duplicate of that object, right? So you have to right-click on the timeline to do copy and paste. Now another way we can kind of, for lack of a better word, like cheat this system, is I could go out here and set my key. It's not even cheating. This is actually really probably how I work more often. Is I'm going to determine where I want my ball or where I want this animation to end, right? Like I'm just going to have a handful of bounces. So I'm just going to go out here to maybe say 60, right? And I'm already on the floor here. So on frame 60, I'm just going to drag this out here and set my other keyframe sort of way out here, S, right? And so now what I get in my animation is these 2 bounces and then it just slides across the floor. I can then go out here and set my other ground keyframes. So let's try like, I'm just kind of setting these randomly right now, in all honesty. There. And now that I have keyframes on the ground, I can set the keyframes that are up in the air. So that's several ways we can make these keyframes, right? So, here comes the scary part. Like throughout all of this, I've just been looking, just paying attention to these keyframes. Is that ball where I want it to be on each of those keyframes? Sure, maybe, right? When I click the one frame at a time, it doesn't look bad, right? You may already be able to see some issues with it, but I'm just controlling the translation right now, right? So I'm going to hit play and see how this looks. So 1, it's playing way too fast. How do we fix that? Anybody remember? Yeah. So you right-click on the timeline, playback speed, and we're going to set it to real time, okay? Because what Maya's doing is just playing it as fast as it can. It's playing it like, 150 frames a second. Right? And so when I hit play now, look at that. Perfect, right? There's a lot wrong with this animation, right? And we did all the things we'd already talked about with keyframes. We moved it, we set our keyframes, we hit S a lot to put it in all of the spots we needed it to be. Why is this not looking the way we want it to look?
Because Maya is boring and it sets it as a linear path between one keyframe and the other.
Right. I've like for all of that work, I've really just given Maya 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces of information, right? I'm like, put the ball here in these 10 places. And Maya's like, all right, but I have to figure out 60 keys. So the things that are making this not look right, let me fix that timeline again just so you can see it better. Again, this is something you're always welcome to do. This is just so it displays a little better on the screen. Settings and preferences, time slider. I always make mine a little taller, and I make my keyframes a little thicker, just so you can see them out there a little bit better. There we go. So Maya's trying its best. So there's two things wrong here. One, I put in information sort of by eyeballing it, right? If I were, it's the same way that if you try to eyeball a drawing, right? Sometimes your proportions get off, like the nose is a little too big, the eyes are a little too small, the forehead's like, I don't know. There's all these different things that you just get wrong in the proportions, right? I kind of did the same thing here. Like there are parts where my ball is moving forward at one pace, and then suddenly it goes faster. And so I was also kind of just guessing on the timing of this. I think for guessing, I got way closer than I expected to. So some is user error, right? Some is I made some sloppy decisions when I was making this. And that's not that I was being sloppy. It's this, my brain is only capable of thinking of so many things at one time. And I was thinking, where does this object need to be? Not like how, like what is the proportion of distance covered over the entire animation, right? And so I made some mistakes that were unclear or that were like slightly incorrect. Some of this I didn't give Maya enough information. I didn't tell it to squash when it hits the ground, right? So we don't have any squash and stretch. We don't have any rotate on this yet. And for me, the reason I didn't do that is because I just know that there's an easier way for me to do that part later, right? It's just like when I'm posing my character, I don't always like use a whole pose just for a blink, right? I can go in and add the blinks later. And so that's kind of secondary action, kind of. And so in this case, those are some of the things I need to fix on the information I have given Maya. I need to perfect that information I gave. But yes, the thing that you answered was a big part of this, is I let Maya make so many decisions in this, right? Particularly the ease in and the ease out, right? If we watch this, like, try to, with your eyes, try to draw the imaginary path that this animation makes, right? It's kind of like a sine wave, right? Like a constant, like, curve that's happening. Right? And that's not how a bouncing ball bounces. Right? A bouncing ball bounces with these bell curves, right? In fact, we were even looking at that the other day when we were looking at, I think it's under arcs. Let me go back and find that really quick. Under arcs, we saw this. This is the path we kind of expect a bouncing ball to make. Right? I'm going to leave this open on another screen here and pull this back in periodically, right? And the thing that we're seeing in ours is instead of smacking the ground right there and coming back, and it's like, instead of that being a sharp V right there, ours is making it like a curve in, right? Like it's coming in and it's like kind of curving in and just sort of lightly kissing the ground before going back up into the air, right? And we can see that arc if we want to see it, right? I can select my object. So this is a new tool I'm going to show you. It's not like a magic tool. This is just a way of sort of tracking your arc and seeing what your arc of your motion is. Under the animation menu, visualize, and create editable motion trail. Sounds like you can eat it, but you can't. There we go. So create editable motion trail. So you see ours has this like curve at the bottom there, right? Now, let's talk about why Maya is doing that, right? How many of you have used an Etch-a-Sketch before? Right? So Etch-a-Sketches are great. You grab them, you're like, I twist this, it goes side to side. I twist this, it goes up and down. And then that's where the problems start, right? You're like, now I want to go diagonal. And that's really hard, right? How do you go diagonal with an Etch-a-Sketch? Like you want to draw a diagonal line. You have to turn them both at the same time, right? That's two values changing at the same time in order to get a diagonal, right? Well, objects all throughout the world move diagonally and in these weird arcs. Like they very rarely move in straight lines, right? And so that's what's happening is there are two values changing at the same time, and we're getting that that point where it hits the ground and starts going back up. Maya is like trying to rectify that with all of these numbers changing, and it's just trying to smooth everything out for us. It thinks that it's doing us a favor. A lot of times it is. A lot of like slow in and slow out, right? Like a lot of times when my hand comes to a stop, it slows to a stop. In fact, the peak of this kind of looks right. Like when the ball bounces up in the air, we do want it to slow at the top, but we don't want it to slow in and slow out at the bottom. When we talk about ease in and ease out or slow in and slow out, we're saying have control of that. Like know when to make things change quickly, right? So that's where we have to open up our new friend, the graph editor. So to remind you how to open that up, we can go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. That's going to open it up in a separate window, right? For the sake of this class, how I'm going to look at it is in my viewport here in some way. So one of the ways you can do that too is you can go to the workspaces here and go down to animation, and that will open it up along the bottom. Sometimes that's a little harder for you all to see. So another way we could do that is I can also open it like here, and I can drag it to like this shape here, and I can work with it over here. Right? Which of these works best for you? What do you like to look at best? With it along the bottom or with it over on the side like this? Any idea? Let's give this a try. If it's hard to see like this, let me know. I think this will let us see more of the up and down motion, right? Okay, so this is what we have in here. Right? And this is just a confusing mess, right? We see this one curve that's climbing, but it's climbing kind of inconsistently, right? We see this other curve that's going up and down. We see a bunch of other curves that are just straight, right? So like this is where we're going to be able to control some of this stuff, right? The best way to work with the graph editor is to not work with it with all of these showing, right? If I just select a curve, if I select Translate X, it'll hide all the others, and I can see Translate X, okay? What intimidates most people about the graph editor is figuring out what Translate X even means, right? What am I talking about? When I edit this curve, what am I actually editing? Right, if I grab this, I can click on it and move it around. What am I changing? Right? I can move it side to side. I can move it up and down. Like, what is it doing to my animation? Right? So let's talk about that first, like how to interpret this graph. So for each of these channels we have selected, I have Translate X selected right now. Translate X is how I move the ball side to side, right? So like if I were going to go in there and move my ball side to side, I would be adjusting the Translate X channel in my channel logs, right? You can even see that at the start. Translate X is the only one that has anything in there right now, right? It has like a -7.84, right? Translate Y doesn't have anything on it. It has it at 0, and that's because we're on the ground. Remember when we zeroed that out? Right? So we're on the ground, and so that value is the only thing that we're really seeing there. So when I'm editing this curve, right, I'm only editing the translate x value. And the translate x value is just the side to side, right? So here's how to interpret it. Up and down on this graph is the number in your channel box, right? So if this, let me just kind of show you. If this keyframe, let me hide this just so we can, we'll bring it back up here in just a second so you can see it. I don't want that to get confusing though. If I select this keyframe, usually how I select keyframes is I drag around it and select. The reason for that is you may accidentally select the whole curve if you try to click. So you can drag select it, and you can click and move it, but I actually have a tendency to middle click and move it because to click and move it, I have to get over there on it. Right? I have to click it, and then I have to click it again right on it to be able to move it up and down. What I have a tendency to do is drag select, and then out here in space, I can middle click, and it will move it as well, right? So watch what happens. You can hold shift to keep it locked in one axis. If I hold shift and middle click here and drag it up, my ball moves more forward on that keyframe. Right? And so now all those other values are the same. The up and down values are the same. Now my ball goes from there to there, back to there, and then on through, right? So what I'm doing is I'm just adjusting my forward and back motion on my ball with this curve, right? And so if I wanted this to seem like it moved a little bit more consistently over time, I could do something like this, right? Now, how would we actually want that ball's forward and back to move? Like, if we weren't even looking at this curve, how do you expect a ball's forward momentum to react as it's bouncing? How would we actually expect that? Anybody have any ideas, or are we just like coffee deprived right now? Yeah.
Would it just start out like fast and then eventually slow down?
So it would, yeah, it would be traveling at like whatever speed we had it at the beginning, if we want it going fast or medium speed or whatever. But eventually it's going to lose energy on its forward momentum, right? We've bounced balls before. Eventually it will come to a stop, which means it's losing that energy and coming to a slowing to a stop, right? So we have a lot of keys in here to try to show that. I'm going to show you this a little more simply, right? Which is, I'm just going to delete all of these except for the first and the last one, right? And you'll see now what we have is our ball like starts moving forward slowly because this curve isn't climbing yet, right? This curve is flat pretty much right here at the bottom. Like it's not moving forward very fast, right? And then it starts moving forward faster, right? And then it slows down a little bit more at the end, right? So the way we can adjust this is I can move the keys, but I can also grab these little tangent handles that are on the keys. You see this, like, they have these little lines that go through. And if I grab those, I can adjust how this curve looks. So I could just do something like this. Right? And as you see in my bounces here, bigger bounces at the beginning, like smaller distance covered forward at the end. Right? And so that's what we're going to get here. Now it's going to go forward bigger here. And then as we get closer to the end, it's going to be smaller. Right? So I mean, I may not want it to slow down that much. I can always adjust this tangent too. Like maybe I'm not going to have this bounce all the way to a stop. Maybe it just kind of continues to slow down a little bit. And maybe that's even too much on that side, right? So you can adjust your curve to whatever you want for that forward and backward motion, right? Okay. Hopefully that curve was easy to understand. Any questions on that right now? Okay. How I'm manipulating this is with the middle click. I know it seems really not intuitive to use the middle click, but you have to click way fewer times. And with the regular click, it's really easy to miss, especially if you're trying to grab this tangent. If you click and then try to grab that tangent. If you miss just by slightly, you grab the whole curve, and then you end up moving the whole curve and breaking it. Right? So again, I drag select the curve or the keyframe, and then I usually drag select the curve and then middle click to adjust it. And that seems like a lot of steps. That seems like a lot of like tedium of why to go through it in that specific way. But once you start working, you'll realize that that's a little bit faster to manipulate things that way. Okay, so I fixed that curve. Now my animation's perfect, right? Let's watch it again. Not so perfect. So what's some other things messed up with this? So there's no squash and stretch. We'll get to that one just a little bit. What's some other things happening here? Yeah.
There's like an inexplicable high jump at the end.
So the height of the jumps are kind of inconsistent, right? What's some other things you're seeing? So I really haven't even fixed that like slowing in and out at the bottom, have I? Like it still looks like it kind of curves at the bottom. Like it doesn't feel like it's hitting very hard. So I'm just going to start walking down. If I go to my translate Y, what does that curve represent? The height, right? This is the up and down movement. Remember on our Etch-a-Sketch, we already covered our side to side. Now this is our up and down, right? So again, it's very easy to forget that the up and down value is the value in your channel box. What's side to side? So as we go up, we're changing the value of our translate Y. As I go forward on this graph, what does forward represent? Huh? Right, so it represents time, right? So as we go forward and back on this, we're going forward and backward in time. As we're going forward and backward on our graph, we're going forward and backward in time, right? So what's happening is, at the beginning of this animation, our ball is starting really high, right? As we go forward a little bit in time, our ball drops down to 0, to the ground, right? And as we keep going forward, it goes back up again, right? And we continue going forward, it goes back down again, right? So that's one of the hard parts for people is recognizing what this graph represents. Because it's really easy to say, oh, I want my ball to go forward more, and people will grab this keyframe and move it forward. And you're not doing that. What you're actually doing when you move that forward is you're changing the time in which that ball hits 0. Right? You're making it hit 0 later, not moving the ball further forward in that direction. So this is where people really struggle with a graph editor, and some of you, it's just going to click, and you're going to be like, oh, I got it. And some of you are going to have to fight with it a little bit. I use the word have to, right? Like this is like to animate, you really have to get good at this. Like I don't even think about this anymore. This is second nature to just hop in there and move it around, right? And as much as of a pain in the butt that may feel right now, this becomes such a useful tool, right? So since we know that these values represent height, I can make my ball consistently decrease its height every bounce, right? Just by grabbing these keys, raising and lowering them, right? And so now we get this consistent decline, right? I can even like make it happen a little more drastically if I wanted to, right? Look at that. Very quickly, I was able to change the height of those bounces, right? Now, the problem, what we're seeing here, I'll show you a couple of things really quickly. If I click this square button up here, this will fit my frame range. So this button right here sort of resizes that. This one kind of does a similar thing too. It's based off of your selected part of your timeline. And just like any other scene in Maya, if you hold Alt and right click, you can zoom in and out. Alt and left click, doesn't really do very much. Alt, because we can't tumble in here, right? This is a 2D graph. And Alt and middle click will let me sort of pan around, right? So I can always zoom in around here and like look at stuff specifically. Now if I hold Shift and Alt and then I right click, I can sort of scale my range that I'm viewing, right? So if I want to see that curve a little flatter or I want to see it a little taller, I'm really just changing the range that I am viewing in my graph here, right? And so this is a way you can kind of resize this to where this graph makes sense to you. In most cases, this button right here will get you pretty close to a good starting point, right? So if we look at these curves here along the bottom, the reason our ball feels like it's easing out or easing in on the ground is because it is, right? I'm going to zoom in here and let you see this. The closer I get to the ground, the like right here, that number, that up and down number is changing a lot, right? From frame 4 to 5, that number drops a significant amount. It makes like a big surge there, right? But from 7 to 8, it's not very much change in the up and down, right? And that's because this graph isn't changing very much. So if I want it, if I go to that motion trail thing again, just to show you, visualize, create editable motion trail, right? This isn't going to update exactly in real time, so I kind of have to finagle with it a little bit. But if I want this to feel like it's smacking the ground, I need to feel like that curve is still continuing to decline all the way up to the point that it gets to the keyframe, right? And so if I go up here, if I try to adjust this, this tangent, I can get that. I can make it start looking like that. Oh, sorry. I can make it start looking like that. But the problem is now it also goes to the floor, right? So now it's like coming in faster, and the distance between 7 and 8, it covers a big distance, right? Just like we would see it in here. See, it's covering a big distance. The bigger distance up and down here versus here, it's a smaller distance, right? The problem with that, though, is I need that to happen on the other side, too. And right now, my tangents are connected to each other, right? So what I need to do is break those. So if I click this button right here, this little V shape, it's going to break those tangents. So you see now they're a little dotted line, right? And if I grab this tangent and manipulate it, I can get it sharp on this side and sharp on this side. And now watch how that first impact looks compared to the rest of them. So that's feeling more like a bounce, isn't it? Right? So that feels like it smacks the ground a little bit more. Now, all of that is really just based off of the amount of space that object covers in a single frame. Anybody need me to do any of that again? Or yeah, did you catch that? Okay, yeah.
Every time I click on a tangent, it like pulls them all up visible again, and I can't click on them.
Oh, it pulls all your curves up visible again? Okay, I've seen this before. Occasionally, some of you may be having this where if you drag select a single tangent, what happens is it changes your viewport to look like this, where you see everything again, right? I don't know why it changes this. It may be how you open the graph editor, but it's this button right here. So you see this little like, that one right there? You can uncheck that. It's all like, if you look at mine's not doing it. I have auto frame turned on, but I don't have, there's like another one in here that's like auto select. Yeah. But try unchecking that and seeing if that helps. This button right here. And sometimes that will fix it. Did that fix it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yes. Yeah, I'll do that again on the next ones here, so you'll see it, because I'm going to have to do it for the rest of them too. So where you only want to be able to move one of the arms of the tangent, right? Again, just to kind of show you how I did that. I'm holding Shift-Alt to kind of zoom in, just so I can see it a little bit better. I'm going to go and stop my playback. And then I'm going to drag select the keyframe. Right? So I have the keyframe selected, and you see that those arms are locked together. Right? That you can actually see that up here. It's this unify tangent. That is turned on for that keyframe. Right? So it's the one over here next to it, this V shape. That's going to break the tangent. And so now that tangent is broken, I can move one at a time. So I'll do that a few more times here. Break that tangent. Move them one at a time. Now, actually, I'm going to go ahead and set that one back really quick just to show you. A lot of people get a misconception and think what that means is I need to break all of my tangents. Apparently Maya sets them all wrong and I need to break them all. That's not true. Some of them don't need to be broken, right? Like these on the top, I want this dome shape, right? I want this like this curve here. And so if I went in here and broke this tangent and did that, like, look what happens to the peak of this impact now, right? Like the first two jumps are feeling okay. See how that felt weird? Like, so we don't want to break them all. We just want to break the ones that make sense to break, right? So I'm going to click auto, set that back to the way it should be. And then again, I can just grab all of these, break them, and then one at a time manipulate these to get there we go. So now if you look at my bouncing ball, it's looking better, right? I'm going to go ahead and delete that key. If you're using these editable motion trails, recognize they're just objects on your scene that you can delete. So you can grab the trail. You have to kind of drag the middle part of the trail and just hit delete. And then we can just see what the motion looks like. Okay. Now we can still continue to make changes and add keyframes, but recognize that now if I go in here and hit S, now that I've adjusted these tangents, like if I go in here in between these curves and hit S, it's going to put a keyframe in there with it, right? And so now my tangent still works, but now I get this extra data point in there. And so like for a little while here, I'm going to try to see if I can make some of these changes just individually on certain channels, right? So for example, right now my ball doesn't have any squash and stretch. Like we talked about that a minute ago. It needs some squash and stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and put some squash on the impact for each of these, right? And I'm just going to do that with auto key on. I'm just going to, middle click and add just a little bit of squash on that impact, about 0.3 on that first one. Since auto key is on, it set that keyframe for me. If you don't have auto key on and you're just wanting to key that one channel, you can right click on the letter or on the word squash and stretch and say key selected, and it'll just key that, right? And so since I have everything else keyed, you'll see that it just squashed it on that keyframe, right? So I'll continue to do that over here. Again, more squash. I don't want quite as much squash, the smaller bounces that happen here. If you hold down Control while you're doing your middle click drag in the viewport, you'll get even more fine control of it. As my floor is needing to be expanded. There we go. Okay. So I have my squash, right? And when we watch it, though, that squash isn't going to look exactly... I'm going to tear this off just so you can see it a little bit better. That squash isn't going to look exactly right, right? If I... Why isn't that looking right? Huh?
It doesn't have any stretch.
So it doesn't have any stretch, right? Let's go back and remember why we have squash and stretch, right? It's showing the result of the physical forces in the scene, right? So if I were to frame by frame in here, right, on one of these impacts, you'll notice that, like right here on frame 8, my ball is squashed, right? And the reason it's squashed is why? It hit the floor, right? That force impacted it. It has to redirect its energy, so it absorbs some of it, and it's going to redirect it to push it back out, right? If I go to the frame before it, though, before it's even hit the floor, it's already squashed, right? And that doesn't make sense. Why would it already be squashed? It hasn't hit the floor yet, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add some stretch there. Now, it's kind of up to you how much you want to do. I like to add, the more you add, the more cartoony it's going to look. So it really depends on where you want to be. So I'm going to add just a little bit here, right? And then I also like, if I just for a second, I'll turn back on that motion trail. If my ball is traveling along a path, like look the way it's stretching right now is straight up and down. If I sort of rotate that to stretch along the arc, it just always seems to look a little bit better. Right. So now we get this, now that feels like an impact, right? But it feels like I dented it because now it hits and it stays dented, right, until it goes back up. So one frame after my impact, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to stretch it again. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. Now it's getting this feeling of that impact, right? So I'll continue to do this here on all of the impacts. Uh-oh. Whoa. That wasn't updating for me very well. The middle click is really sensitive on these mice. Squash and stretch is also not updating in real time, is it? What's happening? Set it to about 0.3. 0.2 is looking better. There we go. Again, on this one, anybody else having that issue where the squash and stretch isn't seeming like it's working in real time? Okay. I think it's actually just a Maya issue. Like if I were to restart Maya, it would fix it. So I'm not going to worry about it right now, though. I'm just going to fix it. So. Okay, so if I watch this now, we're getting that squash and stretch. Now, I want you to notice something. Like, there's still something wrong with this. What is it? It looks like it's jumping, right? The reason it looks like it's jumping is because it's not rolling, right? And so when you think of that, like, have you ever tried to roll a ball and it refused? Right? Like, if you did, you probably should run. Right? That house is haunted, or that at least that ball, right? Balls don't get to make that choice, right? They're passive objects. Like they don't make decisions, right? And it appears that this ball is resisting the impulse to roll. It looks like it's jumping instead of rolling, right? Because it's not rolling at all, right? Like there's no rotation on that RZ, right? So to get that rotation, well, I'm not 100% complete with the squash and stretch, but that is the biggest issue right now is it needs some rotation. So let's look at this squash and stretch, though, and see that you can still edit this, right? I can go in here, drag this into my timeline. That squash and stretch value has a curve, too. Right? Now, it's a kind of ugly curve, right? But it makes sense. We'll see that at the peak of our bounce right there, we're not really stretching it very much. Some people sometimes do. Some people like having a little bit of a stretch up here at the top, right? It really kind of depends on what sort of roll or jump you're going for. I think if I were doing a jump, maybe I would do that. But we're seeing that it stretches out right there, right? And then it's squashing for one frame and then stretching out again, right? Now, what we are seeing is an inconsistency in how much it's squashing and stretching in each of these, right? And so what I can do is very quickly go in here and fix it. This is why the graph editor is awesome, is because I was very inaccurate with the keyframes I was setting there, partially because Maya was kind of being a little buggy, right? But I could do like that, maybe take that squash down a little bit, because I could also decrease the amount it squashes every time if I wanted to. And so I'm making very quick changes to my animation just by adjusting this squash and stretch value in the curve, right? And this is why it's such a powerful tool, right? Is that now I'm able to kind of, raise or lower that amount of squash and stretch. Let's say you showed this to the director, and the director's like, oh, we're going way more cartoony than that. We need way more squash and stretch than that. You're like, okay, I'll go back and set more keyframes. You don't have to. You already have the keyframes. We just need to change them, right? So although I can grab these things and move them with the W key, right? I can also grab these things and scale them. Right? So really, I'm just going to grab the top keys, hold Shift, grab these bottom keys. Right? I'm going to hit R for scale. And I can middle click in here and I can make that scale way bigger. And now my squash and stretch is much bigger, right? Or I can make it way more subtle. And now you barely even notice it, right? So it's a very quick way to adjust all of your curves, right? I kind of liked where I had it though. Now I will say that I kind of lucked out when I was setting these keyframes, and like my timing isn't that bad. There's a couple of spots to me where it feels like it's like some of those jumps are a little slow. Remember that you can still adjust your timing. I can still go in here and grab my control, and if I'm like, I think it takes too long to get from there to there, I can hold Shift, grab all these keyframes, move them in. You have to be a little careful because if you move these in too close, you see that my tangent kind of messes up there, right? So you are kind of adjusting your tangents, but we can do like a quick timing pass on this to improve the timing as well. And so the reason I'm doing this is because every smaller bounce should be a little faster, right? it's not going as high, so it doesn't have to take as long to do that bounce, right? So if I did something like this, I don't think I made any major breaks there. And hopefully this animation is going to feel like it's coming to a stop a little faster, right? Now I know mine just kind of stopped suddenly there. It's because I was really planning on just ending my animation when we get to frame 52. So I'm going to change it to 52. And so now it just feels like it's really probably continuing to bounce. Maybe even when I render it, I would just have it like bouncing off screen. So that was just kind of my thought there. So the last thing with this is this needs to roll, right? Again, I already set a bunch of keyframes on my RZ, but RZ is how I would change that, right? If I click that, you see that I'm getting some roll in that. And so if I go to my RZ channel, this is where, again, the graph editor can be pretty powerful, right? Right now, there is no roll in this at all. And this is going to be a little confusing for some of you because you're going to grab this key and start moving it, and it's going to look like nothing's changing, right? And that's because we're really, really zoomed in here, right? I've changed, if you look, I've changed the RZ, but I've just changed it by 0.00001, right? So sometimes you have to move way out here, like zoom way out, and then move that key way up, and you start to actually see, some numbers change, right? And even at that, I'm still just barely making a dent in that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that number really high. Like if I move that all the way up to 1, look how much I scaled that. And if I reframe it, I can see it like that. But still, it doesn't seem like it moved any, right? Why?
Is it just one rotation?
Huh?
Is it really just showing like one rotation?
Yeah, so it's one rotation, like I've gone all the way around. You're on the right path. So when I typed in 1, what does 1 mean in rotation, right? Was it one time all the way around? Like when I move it 1 unit, we know that really what we're doing is, well, hopefully we realize this. Our grid, we moved it 1 grid square, right? When we move it 1 in translate. What do you think 1 means in rotation? It's either 1 rotation all the way around or something else. 1 degree, right? So if I rotate 1 degree, it looks like this. Like really small amount of rotation, right? So we actually have some rotation in there. But if I wanted this ball to rotate all the way around, how many numbers do I need to go up? 360, right? 360 degrees, right? So that's what's happening here is my rotation is only happening 1 degree, and I want it to go 360. So that can be kind of frustrating because I'd be like moving this thing forever to get to 360, right? What I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to go in here and type in, right up here at the top, I'm going to grab that keyframe, and I'm going to type in 360. So there's this stat box. 8 is telling us what frame we're on, and then this is telling us that value we're on, right? So if I type in 360 and hit enter, it looks like it went flat, but if I reframe this, you're going to see that's the curve now, and you'll see that in this single frame, my ball rotated backwards 360 degrees. So if I don't want it rotating backwards, what do I need that number to be? Negative 360, right? So if I frame that again, select that, and put a negative in front of that, I'll see it does that. And so now this is the rotation I'm getting. Right? And then it kind of rotates back to 0 again there. So what I'm going to do is instead of moving each of those one at a time, I just want, again, this slow growth to 160 degrees. Or, I'm sorry, 360 degrees. So I'm just going to delete all of them except for this one. Right? And type in negative 360 right there. And so what I'm getting now is little bits at a time, it's rotating a whole time forward, right? So maybe 360 isn't enough. Maybe I need it to, whoa, I'm still in scale. Negative 360. So maybe I need this to be like multiple rotations. Wow, what is it doing? Frame that. So maybe I want it to be like 500. Now I want you to notice what's happening. I pull this way down here, and then when I release, it looks like it goes back. But that number isn't going back, right? It's negative 1,000 something now. This isn't a bug in Maya. This is something that Maya thinks it's helping you with, but it's actually kind of annoying. It's called a buffer curve, or it's not a buffer curve. It's called a normalization. So basically, when I move my curve too far down, it's like, oh, you want to be able to see that whole thing. So when I release it, it reframes it for me, right? Sometimes that can get confusing. If you want to turn that off, it's these two buttons here. There's this enable normalized curve display and disable normalized curve display. I'm just going to go ahead and disable it. And so now whenever I move it, wait, that should have disable normalized curve display. That's funny. Enable. Let's do absolute value. Does that do it? Apparently that helps. Which is under view and changing that to absolute value instead of stacked view. There's a chance I hit that button, like 1, 2, 3. I hit 2 by accident. And then there's normalized view. I think if I keep pulling this out, that's renormalize. One of these buttons usually will set that to. Anyway, so now we have this thing rotating multiple times around, right? Let's see if it's too much or not enough. Right? Too much. So I'm going to pull that back. Maybe something like that. Maybe still just a bit too much. I also recognize that it's easing out of that rotation. So maybe I'll make it going kind of fast at first. Maybe a little slower at the end. So maybe a little bit more rotation. I also feel like that's going a little fast in terms of acceleration there. For some reason that one feels weird to me. I think I'm rotating a touch too far forward. Right there. Or maybe it was a touch too far back. Okay. I recognize that that was a lot of tinkering with this to just get a ball to seem to bounce the right way. I promise you this gets easier, but only if you fight with it, right? Anybody remember the first time you rode a bicycle? Yeah, that was rough, wasn't it? Although I imagine riding a bicycle right now would be rough. It's been years since I've even tried. So, I recognize like this gets intuitive, right? This gets very intuitive. But the only way to do that is to fall off that bicycle a few times, right? And so the only way to fall off that bicycle is to get on it and practice it, right? And so this is what I want you to do is to try to get your own bouncing ball working by next class period. Now, I'm not going to take that up as a graded assignment. It's more that we're going to move on to something else next class period. And so I want you to have a bouncing ball that you can be like, okay, I'm pretty much done with that. let's talk about what the whole project is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up D2L really quickly. I know we're getting close to the end of class. So this is the second project. So under assignments, I'm going to go to PR2, bottle and ball. All right. Here we go. So in this project, you're going to further explore animation, rigging, and the full production pipeline. In this piece, we're going to explore the differences between something moving on its own and something being moved. We will animate a ball bouncing, and in contrast, we'll also animate a bottle jumping. Okay, we'll get to that bottle here in just a second. The ball must bounce on the screen at least twice, and the bottle must jump at least once. Okay, that's a minimum. If you want to add more, that's cool. The finished piece should be a fully rendered animation, ideally 1920 by 1080, just because I don't want you to have to re-render it later. If you're getting down to the line and you're like, I can't get that render out because it's going to take forever, I'll accept 1280 by 720. Recognize that in a year from now, you're going to need this render to be at 1920 by 1080. So if you can't get that render out, that's cool. But for the project, I'll accept the smaller one. How is this graded? Every project is graded with a rubric. Right? And so our rubric for this one, I'm going to look at modeling, lighting and rendering, the bottle animation, the ball animation, and overall presentation. You can't see that super well on there, but you can see it on the document. Bottle. What am I talking about? Like I'm sorry. And the final rendered file will be due XXX. Because I haven't put a date in there yet. Now, at our schedule, I have it set to be due the day before spring break, or fall break. Spring break. You get 6 months. The day before fall break, right? That's coming up pretty quickly. I think that what it's really going to be is the day we come back from fall break, but we'll have covered everything before fall break, and you should be able to get it all done. That way it doesn't ruin your fall break. Like we'll have done everything in class, and so if you're kind of following along and kind of keeping up, but I also realize like some of you are planning on just hanging out like during fall break, like maybe even staying here in your dorm or in your apartment or whatever, and you may want to keep working on this. May want to like spend some time to like polish it up. Or, sometimes people are just like, I'm bored. Do you have something I can be working on? That may not be you. You may have friends. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm usually like, I'm bored. I'm actually never like that. So that's why I'm probably going to make it due after fall break, unless the next couple of class periods we are just really zooming through it and everything clicks. So next class period we're going to model a bottle to be the thing that's going to jump. In fact, we're going to model 2 bottles in one class. We're going to do it pretty quickly because I'm just going to show you some additional modeling skills. Now, I'm going to leave that up to you on what you want to model, but next class period when you come in, you need to bring your reference images for that. So let me give you some examples of types of bottles you can use from my class here. In the world? I'm not seeing it right now. Am I the wrong one? I must be. Give me 1 second. Greg in class. Where that thing's at. another place where it's at. There it is. Ball and bottle. Dragon class. Oh, I was. There we go. Bottles. So I have a whole bunch of bottle images here of the two bottles I'm going to model. Okay. You can find these on the internet, but you need to find them beforehand. Or I think the fun way of doing this is just go to the grocery store and walk around in the shampoo and the ketchup and the salad dressing aisle and just find a bottle that is shaped in an interesting way that you think you may want to model. Okay, so the two that I chose was Silk Therapy. It's got silk on there 3 times in a row. Do you see that? Silk Therapy. And it cures something. I think that's soy sauce. I think that's the different language of the silk therapy. So I picked this one because it's interesting looking. Like it's an interesting shape, right? This is the bottom of it. So the side. So it's got a very interesting shape to it. And I think that this is going to be a good bottle to explore polygon modeling. I picked this one. This one's delicious. This one has a lot of neat stuff on it, but it's very symmetrical, right? And it's got that nice like wooden cap, and like the label is awesome. I actually have another one now, another hot sauce that's like a habanero sauce that I like even better. It's green. So you're going to need a bunch of pictures of this, primarily some from the side, like straight on the side. So think of the orthographic views, side, top, front, like that. We're going to take pictures from that, and then we're going to use these as reference inside of Maya to create our own bottles. And it's going to go way faster than you think. Like, if somebody put a timer on me, I could probably get that bottle right there modeled in under 3 minutes, right? Nobody's going to put a timer on me. We're going to take our time. But I just want to show you a couple of modeling techniques. We're going to model the Silk Therapy bottle in polygons, and we're going to model this one in NURBS. Finally going to talk about that NURBS thing that we keep mentioning. It's really not that impressive. It's kind of like it's not going to be something that blows your mind. But you're going to see that it's a tool you can use to start creating shapes, right? But this is fun. Find some stuff that you want to model, something that you think will be a fun challenge, but not like crazy. Like it shouldn't be like an old cologne bottle with a photorealistic elephant on it or something like that, like in the shape of an old Ford truck or something. Like find something like kind of simple that has an interesting shape. So, any questions about any of this? All right. So try to have that ball bouncing by next class period, and bring in some images, digital images, to be using for next class period. Have a good day.